Hi, welcome to another episode of Koinonia. I'm Andres, and this is
Jonathan.
And we're going to be talking about guilt versus shaming. So according to Lifeway Research, they published the results of a survey that sought to answer the question, and this is the question: which of these feelings do you seek to avoid the most? This was the answer. 38% of Americans say they avoid shame the most. 31% of Americans say they avoid the feeling of guilt the most. And 30% say they avoid the feeling of fear the most. So that's a pretty interesting statistic there.
Very interesting. I if I had to have guessed, I think fear would have been at the top.
Yeah.
Because fear is a huge motivator, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that's why it isn't at the top, because people recognize how fear can motivate them to do better, right? So I don't know, but shame doesn't surprise me either. Mm-hmm. The fact that most Americans are wanting to avoid the feeling of shame, it makes sense because of our current culture today, right? Because today in our culture, shaming has become more popular than it should, right? And then there's even this backlash against shame. I mean, we have fat shaming, right? Which I'm particularly sensitive to. All right, people fat shame. All right.
Hey, sometimes I get that too. I get food shaming. There's another one called mom shaming.
Yeah, where moms shame other moms for doing something differently. Right? So shaming has become a trend almost in our culture, and there's a backlash. People don't want to be shamed, and I think there's a reason for that. Because shame has this idea that you're worthless.
Oof.
When you shame someone, you're worthless.
Yeah. I mean, I could just, this an example of when I took a test in college. I remember I had the biggest problem because I got an F one time. It was my first F, and I felt horrible. And I remember thinking that not the difference between getting an F and being an F. So and after I took this test, I felt like an F. Like I was a failure.
Yeah.
I was worthless.
Yeah.
Not that I made a mistake or,
Yeah, so shame, maybe shame is a feeling that we really want to avoid. And I can see that, particularly if it comes with this idea of being worthless. Now, what's interesting is that this Christian organization, Gleanings, took this research, and it's basically asking the question. It's saying, is our churches emphasizing the wrong selling point of the gospel? In other words, Christians, let's just throw it out there. Christians tend to use guilt and fear and even shame to supposedly win people to Jesus. Okay? Yeah. And this is basically saying, are we focusing too much on guilt and fear and not enough of shame? Because obviously Christians are more afraid of shame, so let's use shame to win them to Jesus.
Oh my goodness. So I think, Jonathan, I mean from my personal gut feeling, I really don't think that we should be using shame in church. I mean, that's something that I think should be outlawed within church.
Yeah.
I don't know what you say to that.
Shame, absolutely, because in the Bible, right, way back in the book of Genesis, when it talks about how God created humans, the Bible tells us that we were created in the image of God.
Oof.
Right?
Yeah.
And that means we have inherent value. We have inherent worth. And so to shame someone is taking that worth away. And it is a God-given value that we all have. We all are worth something.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jonathan. I think it's when you take away someone's identity which is a child of God, that is where it becomes wrong. And the church should never use that. Now, I do think that there is some space for guilt in the church. I don't know. How do you feel? I mean...
See, okay. So guilt plays a role, and I think shame plays a role. And I think all of these play a role, but it should not in any way, okay, be the number one tool that we use. It shouldn't even be the number 2 tool. It shouldn't be the number 3 tool. It shouldn't, okay, it's kind of down there at the bottom, because when you use these tools to win people to Jesus, it's never a lasting faith. Jesus tells us, right? He tells us in the book of John that if I be lifted up, right? If Jesus be lifted up, he will draw all men to himself. And he was foreshadowing the cross there. He was foreshadowing the moment when he would be lifted up on the cross. And he says that is what draws people to Jesus. That's what draws people to the gospel, because that's love, right? Yeah. Jesus laid down his life for us, and it is love. It is a sacrifice that God himself chose to do this, because, hey, guess what? We're worth something. Right? So let's get rid of shame. Guilt, guilt plays a role in the sense that we look at the cross and we say, wow, I can't believe Jesus did that for me.
Well, I think sometimes we lose that perspective. What I want to say is that I don't think guilt should be used in a church as far as an institutional church, but I think it should be used in a small group setting like accountability, where a friend can come up to you and say, listen, what you did was wrong. Of course, there has to be a relationship there. And sometimes within a big institution, there's no relationship. So it's kind of hard to bring that out.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think generally speaking, we should try to stay away from these things. We should lift up Jesus. And then when contexts are right, when the relationships are right, let's throw in accountability. I like that word better. I like accountability instead of guilt, shame, and fear. Let's talk about accountability. I'll give you that. Anyways, what do you guys think? Do you think the church should be using guilt, shame, fear? Do you think there's an appropriate use of each of these? We want to hear what you have to say in the comments below. Let us know. And if you like what you see here on Koinonia, we encourage you to subscribe so that you know when the latest episode comes out.